Evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Uninsured Ankles podcast. Joining me, Nick Swanson, this evening is Jordan Stratton. Jordan, welcome back from Vegas. It's good seeing you, buddy.
It's
Uh,
good to be here.
we're going to be running through college basketball this week. We are an NBA focused podcast, but tis the season for March Madness, and Jordan just spent a little time in Vegas, putting some money down to win the green out there. So, I'm a big hoop head when it pertains to college basketball as well. So this is a great opportunity for just the two of us to kind of get after a little bit and some of the takes we're seeing so far in the first weekend for the NCAA tournament. So, what you got, Jordan? What's your hottest take you got from your time in Vegas?
Hottest take: the SEC is trash, and we can leave it at that. We'll definitely dive into that a little bit more. But the SEC has had 14 teams in the tournament, and we've come to find that there are not that many of them left. That being said, a few of them got, because they were such high seeds, they got beneficial matchups in the first rounds. And we've seen them been able to make it through to the Sweet 16, but there were a good handful of times where they had a beneficial matchup and they still failed to cover spreads, beneficial matchup, and they lost very badly, with the exception, I think, here of Arkansas, who have snuck their way into the Sweet 16. But I'd say that's my strong take from the opening weekend is the SEC is garbage.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, like really, the games people who have won in the SEC have been the people you have to win, or it's a complete upset, right? Florida, Tennessee, Auburn, they're all 1 and 2 seeds. Like, great, cool. Most Power Five teams should win their first game as a 15, 16 seed, let alone maybe toss up at an 8, 9 matchup, whoever wins that. So they should be winning those games.
Yeah, when you're looking at the population of folks that are picking teams in their tournament or in their brackets to win it all, when you've got Auburn and Florida making up almost 50% of picks for tournament winner, with the only team rivaling those two percentage wise being Duke. Though there are really high expectations there, and I think the UConn game today is a perfect example of how we've overvalued the SEC this year. I think was something that's pretty telling is, we've had they were all highly rated coming into the season, or at least most of these SEC teams were, and they did perform how they were supposed to in their pre-conference schedules. They won the games that they were supposed to win pre-conference, so they kind of solidified those top 25 rankings. And so, to be clear, I'm not saying that a lot of these teams aren't top 25 teams. They are, but I think their value is hyperinflated because after they did a good job of securing themselves top 25 spots in their pre-conference play, the rest of the season they're just playing against each other. And so when you've got, what in my opinion, them being over-ranked going into conference play, then they're just beating up on each other. The people who are in charge of the rankings are seeing top 25 teams beating or losing to other top 25 teams and aren't going to move them up and down as much as they would a team that, is in the top 25, losing to somebody outside the top 25, or someone that's already outside beating a team that's in.
For
So
sure.
they had a little confirmation bias of,
Yes, it's all circular reasoning, right?
they started off being a little bit too high ranked at the beginning of the season, even though they did win some of the games they were supposed to at the beginning. And then as they're just beating up on each other, you're confirming the already over high ranking, because they weren't moving a whole lot even when they were losing to each other. So yeah, we saw even some of the games that won, guys aren't covering their spreads. Florida today being a perfect example.
Absolutely.
Obviously tip the cap to Dan Hurley's Yukon Huskies, who were touting the longest win streaks in the NCAA tournament since the Florida Gators back in, and like what is that, 2006 and seven,
Something
when
like
they
that,
went
yeah.
back to back, 13 straight wins. Got it. It's an impressive feat. We're probably not going to see it again for a long time. Um, but that was a game that the Gators should have been able to handle their opponent. That's for sure.
I mean, let's not parse words though. UConn's got some players, right? Like Lee McNeely is an absolute stud, and he's going to be a stud in the NBA too. And I think that's part of what you see in the NCAA tournament. You either have to have like these super efficient teams, or you've got to have NBA dudes who are legit NBA guys, and UConn still has that. And so, tip of the cap to them for making it a good game.
And on that vein, I'm curious what your thoughts were coming out of the St. John's game, because I think what you just said rings true about that game. There isn't one guy on that roster that I view as I'm like, okay, that's an NBA ready prospect who's going to immediately, make an impact at the next level. Not that they don't have good players. Obviously, when you're winning 30 games in a season, you've got some good players. But how do you think that affected how the game yesterday played out?
It's hard to say. I think you want to look for quote NBA players, but you're also looking for ready NBA players kind of guys, right? Like usually the juniors, the seniors, the Cooper Flags, those kind of guys. You're not looking for the unpolished diamond in the rough that's going to pull you through, right? But as far as St. John's, I'm looking at their roster. I remember I kind of forgot this, but RJ Lewis, he had like bench at the end of the game. He was all
Yeah.
like he was conference player of the year. I don't know if he's an NBA guy. Like I don't know his game well enough, but one of the few times I watched in the season was yesterday, and he didn't obviously didn't avail himself well, and Patino didn't think so either, as he was sitting on the pine at the end of the game, which is a really big deal here.
Yeah, and we were discussing this as a group while we were out there watching the games. Is it seems like not on because he had a bad game. That no ifs, ands, or buts about it. He shot 3 for 17 from the field. That's a there's just no way that you can paint that in a positive light. But
Mhm.
usually, when you're talking about a conference player of the year, that's not getting you on the bench. That's not going to be something that's keeping you out of crunch time minutes in a two possession ball game of the NCAA tournament.
Yes.
That should still be your go-to option. That in a game where you're trying to work your way back in. I mean, it's not like anybody on that team was shooting the ball well. Like he might have been shooting 20%, but as a team, they shot 28% from the field and somehow kept it a two possession game. So it honestly, that was a red flag for me for him as a player is and knowing that Patino is not going to just sit him because he's having an off shooting night. Clearly, there was something else going on behind the scenes that led to him getting benched.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of layers to this, right? Patino being a coach we all trust. Like if we want to say he's slimy, greasy, whatever, like I'm
We
I'm
trust
I'm
it. We
content
trust
having
him
that.
on the court. We trust him
Yeah,
on the
but
court.
yes, we trust him on the court. He's a great basketball coach. I think that's the upshot here, right?
Yeah,
Um, Also, we're not talking about a loaded roster, right? Some of the Kentucky teams with the Harrison twins and Karl Anthony Towns, where you have like, oh, we're gonna do two platoons and maybe our freshman point guard who's kind of led us most of the seasons faltering a little bit. We're gonna lean on our junior or senior point guards. This isn't that situation. This is again conference player of the year, not a stacked team. Like this is one of their guys. It's going to show a lack of maturity on his level, I think, in a very large way. And I think it's to me like looking at him in the next steps, big red flags if I'm going to pick him up. And he wasn't one of those guys that we were talking about as a lottery pick in the first instance, where it was
right.
like, we can get by some of the personality issues. If there's a personality issue, which this reading between the lines tells me personality issues,
I
that's
mean,
that.
just watching that game, he looked checked out sitting on the bench. Like if you were having a bad shooting night, like we've heard stories about from John Calipari about their NCAA championship run a while ago, where one of their guys was having a terrible shooting night in the first half of the championship game, and essentially came in at halftime, told his team, I have no touch tonight. I can't, I don't have a feel for it. I'm going to get every rebound. I'm going to make every hustle play. I'm not giving up a single point.
Yep.
And that's what you would expect your team leader to do. And I saw him sitting on the bench, like he looked totally checked out. Like even if you do get benched, the expectation from your team would be that you are leading the hype of this comeback, and he was completely out of the game.
And I think this speaks even larger volumes in college than it does in the NBA, right? This college is more of a team focused, thing.
For
The
sure.
leadership in college is a much bigger deal than it is in the pros. Like this is supposed to be your leader. This is supposed to be your on-court leader, and your sideline leader tells you, "Now that guy ain't gonna do it."
It's pretty demoralizing.
Yep, yep, absolutely. And that just for the sake of like knowing how it plays out, I almost wish they would have won just to see, does he start the next game? Does he play the next game? What is his attitude kind of going into the next game? But we'll never know at this point. But it's bad looks indeed.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, going back to my original point, it to me it didn't even feel like Arkansas was really won that game. It really felt like St. John's lost that game. And not to discredit Arkansas. You have to show up. You got to be locked in for the full 40 minutes to be able to take down a team like St. John's. And one thing that they did incredibly well, Arkansas did, was rebounding the ball, especially in the second half when they had a ton of foul trouble for their big men. Their forwards and even their guards really locked into to rebounding the ball. But it was incredibly shocking. Not one, how poorly St. John's shot free throws. Two, you would expect that a 28% shooting night would come from a team that's you can see that every once in a while from teams that shoot high volume threes where they had a terrible shooting night. We saw that earlier in the game between St. Mary's and who did they play against? They made that amazing comeback against Vandy.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
both of those teams shot 2 for 21 and 2 for 19, respectively, from 3 point range. So, and they're both pretty high volume 3 point shooting teams. So obviously their field goal percentages were down. But St.
Yep.
John's is not a 3 point shooting team. They had 4 or 5 missed open layups, and to go along with another 15 to 20 good looks in the paint that they missed. So I didn't feel like at least that part of the game wasn't something that I could say, oh, Arkansas played fantastic defense. St. John's was getting the shots that they wanted and just couldn't pull through. So that was tough on a lot of brackets, I'm sure. I know one of my good friends had them winning it all. Not that they were a favorite, but if they had managed to pull it off, I think he probably would have won whatever his pool was. But what about for you, Nick? What was your hottest take coming out of the opening weekend?
Before we get to that, I want to mention one more thing about Arkansas, which is this isn't like a team that, the 10 seed, their roster says much higher seed too, which I think is something that, Rick Pitino's a great coach. Or yeah, Rick Pitino, but Calipari's a great
Calipari, yeah,
Calipari's a great coach. And he's got 5 stars across that roster. He's got a guy who is projected to be National Player of the Year candidate in John L. Davis. Like he has dudes. And so this shouldn't be a complete surprise to
yeah.
anybody. It's just, you know, it is what it is. But going to your question, hottest take from the first weekend? I don't know if I've got a hot take. It's been pretty like I feel like it's been a pretty boring tournament so far. I don't mean to say that in like a denigrating way, but like I'm who are the surprises, right? You've got McNeese State upset Clemson. That's fantastic. We got some aura going on, like that's fun. But like who's our Cinderella? Like who is the Cinderella we're
Yeah.
talking about right now? Like one of the Cinderellas that we're talking about is Arkansas, and I just talked about how their team is loaded with 5-star guys in Calipari. Like we've seen McNeese go down to Purdue yesterday. Like
Well, we
It
have
just
a chance. We have a chance at a bit of a Cinderella in Colorado State. Now we'll be able to give you the final score of that kind of as it plays out. Right now, Maryland is up 69-68 with 22 seconds left. So we may have ourselves a Cinderella sneaking in. Um, but I would agree with you. I think that was something that not only are we missing a Cinderella, but I feel like we were missing a lot of the close games that we normally think of at this time. The one shining moment teams. We didn't have a single game go to overtime, and I think we only had like four games that were within one possession for their final score, and a couple of those were today.
yeah, I mean, yesterday we had BYU Wisconsin, which was apparently pretty good. I didn't actually end up watching that one, but yeah, these are not inspiring like games, like things you think of iconic, Bryce Drew, Valparaiso shots. Like we don't have any of that, and it's not even like kind of like that stuff.
Yeah, and I think I mean some of the low seeds that won in that opening round were almost projected to win, or at least it was projected to be close. If you're
Colorado
looking
State
at
was.
Colorado State was actually the betting favorite, and a good part of that is because Memphis had injuries to their
Mhm.
roster that obviously limited them. But even when you're looking at Drake, they weren't the betting favorite, but they certainly were an America's favorite, and it was not a particularly close game, and Missouri looked distinctly outmatched in that game by a team full of D2 guys. I think Drake could have been that team for us if they had made a nice run to the Sweet 16. Obviously, they ran into a really solid team yesterday and weren't able to pull it off against Texas Tech. Texas Tech being one of those few teams that falls into that illustrious top 20 offense, top 30 defense in Ken Palm. So it's always tough going against one of those teams. But
Those teams always win. There's always a title in one of those teams, and there's what, 4 or 5 of them this year,
I think there were seven coming into the tournament. I think we had Auburn, Florida, Maryland. Clemson was actually one of them
right?
when they got knocked out. Texas Tech,
Michigan State.
um, Michigan State actually dropped out of that group. Oh, and Duke. Duke
Duke.
was in the group, and Houston. Those were the other two, Duke and Houston. So yeah, the winners tend to come out of that group. And I think we've seen some dominance from those top seeds this year. Yeah, and I just saw earlier today this was the first year in like 5 or 6 years that we haven't had a 13 or worse seed come out of the first round. And right now, a 10 seed might be the lowest seed to make it through to the Sweet 16, which we haven't not had an 11 seed in that second round in a long time either. So yeah, it definitely has felt a little lackluster. I know we've got some big names coming into the second weekend, which people love to watch too. There's going to be some really good marquee matchups, but we definitely were missing that spark for the first
Hmm.
round.
Jordan, do you think this? I've been thinking about the why we're getting this. I want to say vanilla, maybe blander, more chalk. I'll just call it chalk bracket. Do you think like I feel like there's NIL involvement here, right? The rich continue to stay richer and all that, but I'm curious what your take on it all.
It certainly stinks a little bit of NIL. And I don't want to just go out there and say that that's entirely it. Um, but it definitely feels like we're going to see more of this, that the money's going to fall to the big names. There's going to be more parity between your top teams and your bottom teams, which might set up some better Cinderella stories because we're anticipating some of these teams being worse coming into the tournament, and then they're able to pull off these insane upsets. Um, but it certainly poses some concerns. That being said, we might also see a shift in who the marquee teams are because it's going to shift to where the money is. There's some universities that are going to be willing to spend more money on NIL that haven't been, perennial powerhouses in basketball, or a shift from a team that's been kind of on the fringes, like a BYU, for example. They've always been around. They usually make an appearance in the tournament. I'd say they've been in the tournament probably 2 out of every 3 years or so.
And they're always a trendy upset pick because they're always like a 10 seed or an 11 seed.
Yeah, and maybe a year like this year where they performed well and got themselves even a 6 seed. But now we know full well that they are getting just gifted heaps of money to put towards NIL deals. And that's why they've got one of the best recruiting classes coming in for next year. It seems that the community around BYU is committed to making sure that money is not the reason that BYU is held back. And that could mean that we see a future where BYU is a perennial top 3 seed in the tournament. And we could see some of these marquee names become teams that are more consistently in that, 6 to 10 window.
Yeah, AJ DeBonsa next year is going to be an absolute dude. We think about Cooper Flag this year taking over a lot of stuff. I think he's going to do the same thing over at
Yeah,
BYU. Hope maybe not quite the same spotlight because he's in Provo, Utah, instead of Durham, North Carolina, on the East Coast with media markets. But he's gonna be right there for the number one pick in the next year's draft. So
for sure. And
um,
he's got a very similar game and style of play to Cooper too, which seems to fit the NCAA style of play really well. Like he has the ability to stretch out, but really where he thrives is in controlling the pace, and really demanding so much attention once he gets into the paint. But having the court vision and the ball control and the finishing ability to handle everything that defenses are throwing at him. Yeah, so I'd say, yeah, NIL. I think you may be right. I don't want to overreact to one tournament being a little bit more bland in the first round, because we have seen some ho hum tournaments before
sure.
where there isn't that one team that really commands our attention. But it is definitely worth taking a closer look at.
Yeah, and I think I'm starting to put pieces together in my head on this a little bit. I'm getting kind of sad that like I don't know if we're gonna see a CJ McCollum anymore. Gordon Hayward, or Fred Van Fleet. These are guys who had real meaningful differences in the tournament on non on a mid-major team, and their teams went far. And when I see this NIL thing coming about, I'm seeing, hey, if someone's got an inkling of taking the next level, someone is kind of at taking that next level already as a sophomore, as a freshman. You know what? Arkansas, Kentucky, Michigan, any Power Five school with a little bit more of a bankroll is going to say, "Hey, you want to come here and be our guy, and we'll give you twice whatever you're making otherwise." And at that stage, you don't know if you have an NBA career, but hey, I can go find out maybe a little better at this Power Five school, and I'm going to get paid for it. Like, thank you so much for recruiting me, but I'm going to go take that opportunity.
Yeah.
And so I think we're going to lose some of those lower seeds with, again, the NBA guys. I said before, NBA guys are the ones who make some of the difference. The guys who can really take over a game and win you a game, put you on their back in the NCAA tournament. We're going to lose.
Yeah, we were talking about this as well, as we were watching the games, because this same kind of conversation was coming up as we saw a lot of high seeds, or well, favored seeds just winning and rolling through their games, that perhaps, obviously, the NIL, it seems like it's going to be here to stay, or at least for the time being. Obviously, it's in its really early stages, so odds are they probably make some tweaks to how it can get implemented. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on potentially some tweaks that could help with this kind of situation. One thing that we discussed that might might help is an adjustment to either one of two things: having your NIL be contract dependent, receiving the money being almost like a signing bonus with the company. Like if you were to sign on to work at Amazon, you can get a signing bonus for doing so, X amount of dollars, but you only get it, or you only get to keep the full amount if you stay with the company for 3+ years. If you leave before that, whatever percentage of time of that 3 years that you left before, you have to give that percentage of your contract back to Amazon. And I think if we did something like that at the NIL level of, hey, you're signing this contract, this is a X amount of years contract, and for this lump sum of money, then if you don't stay for X number of years, then you're gonna have to give back X amount of dollars that you're being paid for this contract. The issue there is if you're getting offered way more money to go somewhere else, then it's still going to be lucrative for you to leave that contract. So then the second level to that we had discussed was potentially having some adjustments to the transfer portal, specifically in terms of eligibility years. Because for a long time, if you transferred, it was that you had to sit out a year.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had discussed some different options, because obviously we want to be able to give these players the choice of where they want to go. But maybe it's something where you make the transfer and you lose your redshirt year, or you make the transfer and you do have to you have full access to transfer wherever you want, but you lose a year of eligibility immediately. Like, you don't have to sit out a year, but you lose a year of eligibility. I don't think that's necessarily something that we would see roll out, but different ways to we did a big pendulum swing, right?
Yeah.
Where it was super limited on the transfer portal, and now it's everybody and their grandmother is transferring schools 5 times. So how do we even out that swing to get into a place where we make it easy enough for players to transfer, especially in some situations where it's for guys that aren't making a ton of NIL, maybe they need to be closer to family and need to transfer, or what have you. There's a lot of nuanced issues around needing to transfer. So how can we accommodate those while keeping players from abusing it in the way that we described?
Yeah, I'm at a little bit of a loss because I think we are, you talked about the pendulum swung the other way. I think we're at the peak other end of the pendulum right now, right? We're the
Yeah.
most extreme, and I think it's going to come back, and as time goes, things are going to settle out, right? And this is going to be where we are. And I guess the whole thing is, do I think there's things we could do? Yes, but every time you change one piece, I feel like there's going to be a trickle down otherwise, and you're starting to find new and different loopholes that I think we're talking about BYU. Let's say BYU has the ability to have they're basically using that collective next year to get the number one overall recruit in this ridiculous class, right? But on the flip side, are they gonna have somebody who's gonna support that year in, year out for the next decade, 2 decades, 3 decades? There's gonna be some fatigue. This isn't the LA Lakers who have like, regular income. This is like
Right.
asking for donors for money. And so they've got to see results. They've got to see like they're invested. I think there's going to be some leveling out of what it is. On the flip side, I think there is going to be still the haves and have-nots. I think this is going to be a thing that's out there, and I think the big Power Five schools are just going to have the advantage because they're going to have bigger bankrolls. But I think the upshot of some of this is the NIL is focusing more on who's in the portal right now than who are the recruits that are out there. And so I think if you are mid-major program, you have to start rethinking how you go about what you're doing. I think you need to be strategically different. I think you start recruiting
Yeah.
differently. One of my favorite Michigan basketball coaches was John Beeline, who was renowned for like picking out projects that he could see diamonds in the rough. They could develop into players after a year or two, and he had great success at that. Like, not all of them had great success in the NBA, but we've got Trey Burke, we've got Nick Stauskas, Karis LeVert, those kind of guys who are three-star guys coming out of high school that turn into NBA players, and that's fantastic. But I think that's kind of where you've got to go because Arkansas is throwing the bank at just guys in the portal. And I think we're seeing a lot of that is poaching from the bottom levels. But if they have a better pool to just pick from the guys coming out of high school, I think they can do a lot with that and figure something else out a little bit differently.
I think we'll see teams, like you said, they're going to have to adjust that way. And we could see some of these teams, those other teams, pick the mid-major teams, picking up more of the high school recruits for that reason. Patino was talking about this with his team that in an interview, he was talking about the fact that he has a few seniors that are going to be graduating and he needs to fill their spots. He said the first thing that he's going to do is go to the transfer portal. And for him, if a 5-star recruit called him and said, I want to sign with you today, he would say, I'd rather have someone that's been in college for a year or two. And fair enough, they've established themselves. And if you have the money to do it, that makes sense. But that means that those 5-star recruits are staying on the table and that potentially some of these bigger name schools aren't taking a risk on them right out of high school. So maybe what it might look like for those mid majors is, hey, it's time to target hard at some of these recruits that, the 4-star recruits, the 3 stars, like you're talking about, taking advantage of some of those diamonds in the rough, like you mentioned.
I think that's the only way you can go about this at this point if you're a mid-major is kind of scouting, being smarter, doing some of the money ball things, like just being really strategic where I think other people are just going to just throw the lumps of money at it. I don't have anything else to fix NIL. I wish I did. If I did, I'd probably be sitting in NCAA's front office instead of here. You have any
Yeah.
other thoughts around what that would be?
No, I don't think about that specifically. Another thing that, I mean, I feel like I have to mention it, and I don't want it to sound like we're making a homer call out, but Duke has been very impressive. And I obviously they were the number 1 overall seed coming into the tournament. And so they obviously they've got high expectations. They're expected to make the Final Four. But of the number 1 seed of any team in the tournament so far, they have just been dominant. And I had some concerns. Obviously, there was the concerns around Cooper Flagg's injury coming into
Yeah.
the tournament and how healthy he was going to be, if he was going to need a couple games to, knock the rust off after missing a couple. Clearly, the answer to that was no. He made an immediate impact in both games. I mean, it only took 15 minutes of playing time out of him in their first round matchup to win that game by 40. And today, after a bit of a slow start for the first 10 minutes, they just turned on the afterburners, and Baylor wasn't even in the same realm as them. But I
There's a
think
good
that,
team though. They've got like legit dudes on their team too.
yeah, yeah. And I think that goes to show just how deep this Duke roster is. And I think America hadn't really seen that up until this point. Obviously, Flag has been the front and center of everything college basketball this year. But that means that a lot of these guys that are projected first round picks, like 5 guys that are projected first round picks in the NBA next year or this coming draft, have been flying under the radar, and they breezed their way through the ACC tournament, including 2 wins without Cooper, and that's a tip of the cap to their depth. I mean, the fact that they're bringing 2 projected NBA guys off of their bench, they have no weaknesses, and it should be very daunting for the rest of the folks in the tournament.
The intensity that Cooper Flag brings in like the motor, I think just drives this team forward. And I think that they've got all the other pieces between Malak and Proctor's been playing so good.
Proctor's been hooping.
Yeah, but then you're bringing Mason Gillis off the bench. I mean, give me a break. That dude was hooping at Purdue for a lot of years, like 43% 3-point shooter, and you're just gonna bring him as a glue guy. Like, give me a break. I mean, we know the guys. Newpole as well as I don't know how to say his name. Uh,
I also would botch his last name. So
Yeah.
we will insert last name as to not disrespect this man.
Yes, and he's a baller. He's an absolute baller out of Wisconsin, and I love his game. He can handle. He's a great shooter, but there's just depth and breadth, and I don't want to rely. You don't want to rely on a freshman, right? Like we've seen it so few times where a freshman will get you to, a championship. I think that there's a Duke team with Jaleel Okafor that ended up doing it, but that's been it, right?
Yeah.
Carmelo Anthony almost did it back in Syracuse in 2003 as well, but that's it. Like the list is short, and you don't see it without kind of guys around them who are seniors. And if I turned on the Baylor Duke game a little bit late, and I was having some weird deja vu because I was like, Jeremy Roach, what? I didn't think Jeremy Roach played for Duke anymore, and he doesn't. He plays for Baylor, but I was like, that's the type of guy you want on your team that's going to like support a bunch of freshmen. And they do have some guys like I think Proctor's a junior this year, so he's gotten some tread on the tires. Maybe he's a sophomore. Um,
I think he's a sophomore this year.
okay. Well, I'm missing that then. But they're a very mature team for their age. And I think
Yeah.
that speaks volumes of Shire because I wasn't sure when Kay left that Duke was going to continue this, right? Like I felt like the K USA basketball thing was a thing, right? Like he was
Yeah.
one of the few college coaches who had like this NBA respect. And Shire's kept it. And I've been super impressed. I was not expecting that. I thought there was going to be a step down, but he's right there.
Yeah. I think when we saw when Hubert Davis and Shire, they both kind of were part of this changing of the guard of these legendary coaches in, Durham and Chapel Hill. It's really interesting now to look back on it. Hubert Davis obviously had some immediate success, but even then, even with the teams that he had success with, that was a 8 seed North Carolina that made a run to the Final Four, and then obviously a number 1 seed that makes it to the tournament game or the championship game. But we've seen a distinct fall off over the last couple of years, even with teams that are stacked with 5-star recruits. Those are teams that we expect to be making impacts in the tournament. And then you've
100%.
got Shire, who I think we all came into with more doubt, and rightly so. We're talking about replacing Coach K.
Mhm.
I don't think it's any. I think it speaks volumes that Shire has been sitting on Coach K's bench for 10 plus years prior to making this move. But I think most of us were more hesitant about him than we were about Hubert Davis coming in, especially with the initial success of Davis. So it's been really cool to see Shire step into his own. I think over the last 2 seasons, they've I think they're the team to beat at this point.
I hope so. We don't need SEC confirm or any SEC winners, I don't think this year.
Yeah,
But I think one thing about Hubert Davis that I'm kind of starting to realize, and this is the same thing I saw with Juwan Howard at Michigan, is you come into a well-established, well-run organization and you pick up a team that's got seniors on it and a complete roster, some 5 stars coming in, and you're just ripping and ready to run because that team kind of runs itself, right? There's maturity, like there's all those things. And Michigan was good for the first year or two with Juwan Howard, and then they started falling off because he had to start figuring out how to put the pieces together, and he wasn't able to do it. And I think in a meaningful way. Now, fast forward another couple of years, we have Dusty May as our coach for that reason. But I think Hubert Davis had Armando Baycott. I think RJ Davis was there before Hubert took over. Those types of guys, and RJ Davis is still there, but he's gonna go away. And Elliot Cadeau is a good player, but who's their center? Who's their forward? How do they have a team put together at this point? They really don't. They've got some guards and maybe some small forwards, and that's about it. And I'm curious what they do in the future and how he can really
yeah,
put together a team
yeah.
that's his own making.
Definitely. I was talking one of my one of the guys in my family is a big UNC fan, and something that he's talked about for years is that they usually got a stable of big guys. They've got two or three guys that are in that 6'10" to 7 foot range that are dominating the paint and control the game by commanding the rebounds, by being physical down low. And UNC didn't have that this year. And it felt like they didn't make the play style adjustments needed to be able to account for that. They needed their guards to be more physical and scrappy and hard nosed, and it didn't feel like that's what we got out of them. They just relied on some of their. I mean, they've got a couple good big guys on the team, but they're raw, they're young, and maybe not quite as skilled as your Armando Baycots. So you got some pretty big shoes to fill there,
Yeah.
and it didn't feel like they adjusted their play style to account for that skill gap.
Yes. 100%. Quick score update for you, sir. Looks like Maryland beat Colorado State by one, 72-71. So
Man,
curious to see how that game actually finished out and
yeah,
highlights and all that. But
sounds
that's
like
cool.
it was a fun finish. Definitely going to need to go watch the highlights. Some other updates for you. Michigan State down 5 in the first half to New Mexico State. They or just to New Mexico. They were down 10 a couple minutes ago, but lead's been cut into a little bit. And Ole Miss up 9 early in the second half over Iowa State. I need my Cyclones to step up a little bit.
I needed him to step up too. I have maybe a too deep a cut to ask you about this. Do you know anything about Richard Pitino?
I do not know a ton about good old Dick Pitino.
He was the coach at Minnesota. I mean, he's the Rich Pitino. What am I losing his name now?
Rick.
Richard Pitino. Rick Pitino. Names are too close to each other. Rick Pitino's son, right? And
Yeah.
he got kind of the nepotism head coaching job at Minnesota. He did terrible there. He somehow picked up another job at a decent school in New Mexico, and he's doing decent things with New Mexico. And like it kind of flabbergasted me because he was never shown to be that great of a coach at Minnesota. And beating Michigan State at halftime, like nearing halftime, that's a big deal.
Yeah,
Good
we've
for
had
him.
a couple sneaky showings from the Mountain West Conference. Gotta tip your cap to my Mountain West teams. Colorado State was no slouch. They definitely were an undervalued team coming into the tournament with that 12 seed spot. And we saw that in the first round where they handled Memphis and obviously took Maryland down to the last seconds. So, but yeah, New Mexico, they've had a they've they've been a sneaky perennial tournament team, but good to see them putting a good showing against Michigan State.
Yeah.
I don't think either of us are complaining about seeing a deficit for Michigan State
No, I mean, I do like watching Michigan State too. I know I'm a big Michigan fan and they're like the rivals, but they're it's good to root for the Big Ten. It's good to, kind of be a part of that team.
for
But
sure.
you know what? You don't hate to see them get upset too and have a little bit of bragging rights as Michigan going to the Sweet 16 and they're not. So
How do you feel about your Wolverines with a game against Auburn looming?
yeah, so I think I want to get to this point more broadly about like Auburn, Duke, and Florida kind of feeling like they're the perennials. So I think there's an uphill battle if you're playing against any one of those. But as a Michigan fan, I think we can hang. I think we gotta, you know, keep our turnovers down. That's the thing that's plagued us all year. Um,
Yep.
Roddy Roddy Gale, man, he just finally found a shooting stroke again last game against A&M. So we've got size, we've got guards, like we can put it. I think we can put together. And I mean, Broom is a certified dude as well. So got to contend with that.
I
We'll see.
think I think Michigan is putting forward the perfect case for so not only what I mentioned previously about the SEC being overrated, but the Big Ten being underrated is first off, we see that most of the Big Ten teams that made the tournament, every single one of them won their first round matchup. Obviously, UCLA had a tough go against Tennessee,
Mhm.
number two defense in the country. And UCLA has been on and off offensively the whole season. So
Good team's
tough
good team.
tough game. They're a good team for sure. But I think Michigan can kind of be the poster child for how the Big Ten has been underrated. Michigan is hitting their stride, and we're not hearing talk about them pretty much at all. I mean, they've been the underdog for their last 5 games, and they've won all of them. And we're I'm not hearing any chatter about Michigan even potentially upsetting Auburn. So, you heard it here first. I'm going to take Michigan to take down Auburn in the Sweet 16 matchup. Maybe that's just my bias against the SEC talking, but I really think that we need to wake up America a little bit. We could use a good upset to get this get a little bit of life back into this tournament, and I think Michigan could be the team to do it as long as they keep those turnovers down. They match up well against Auburn. Auburn's been dominating with their size. Obviously, they got good guards too. Um, they control the pace really well, but the size of Michigan matches up really well with them. And if they can keep the turnovers down, I think we've got an Elite Eight, if not a potential Final Four spot for those Wolverines.
Especially if Michigan State loses tonight to New
Mm.
Mexico, I think it's a juicy possibility. I would love it. I don't want to get my hopes up too much, but I'm gonna put a few dollars down on Boys in Blue on Thursday. So I don't know if they're playing Thursday or Friday this week, upcoming weekend at least,
Yeah,
second weekend.
let's see what they're doing. They're Friday. They're Friday this
Friday,
week. Yeah,
fantastic. So I have a question for you, Jordan, and I'm gonna exclude Houston from this list because we're talking. I just want to talk about like kind of the three perennial the
sure.
three teams that are really focused on right now. Because I think Houston plays really well, but they're so slow that even if they're the better team, they've limited so many possessions that they're not going to be as effective as potentially a more up and down team like a Duke and Auburn and whatnot.
Sure.
But I think everybody's skewing towards those other three. Do you think? What do you? Would you take the field, or would you take those three right now to win the championship?
I probably am gonna take those three. I came into the tournament riding super high on Florida. I got to watch a couple of their games through the SEC tournament. I caught a few of their games throughout the season, and really, they don't really have any holes, and they've got their point guard. He's one of the hottest players in the country right now.
So hot
Um,
right now.
yeah, he put up, I think it was 17 in the second half today in their comeback win against UConn. So I've got Florida winning in a couple of my brackets, but man, does Duke look scary. The depth that they have is, I think, going to be really hard for most teams to handle. That being said, I'd say don't overlook Houston. They have won all the games that they were supposed to win this year. They're now 31, 32 and 4 on the season now with their tournament wins, and 3 of their losses came in their first 5 games.
Yeah.
So they since late November, they've lost 1 game against good competition.
Yeah.
The they beat BYU by 20 plus, I think 3 different times this year. And that's a team that's a Sweet 16 team. That their defense is hard for anybody to go against. I mean, BYU is averaging 84, 85 points per game. And in the semifinals of the Big 12,
Yep.
I'm a Big 18, however many teams they're touting now. They held BYU to, I think it was 56 points. Defense can go a long way in the tournament. We saw that with Tennessee against UCLA last night.
But this
Or
isn't an aberration for them, right? Like this is like Houston's been here and around here for a while now. And Kelvin Sampson is a coach. Like we've known him as
yeah,
a
yeah,
legitimate coach for a while. So like you're right. I'm probably shortchanging them too much to kind of cut them out of those three. I think their pace of play still scares me, but
yeah. Well, here's what I'll do just to keep it a little spicy. If my options are to go with Auburn, Duke, and Florida or the field, I'm going to take the field just because of the value of the pick. Because I think it, I don't know what the odds are for something like that, but I'm guessing that those three are not they're not the not only are those three would those three be the favorite, but they are probably favored to win. They're more likely than not to win as far as odds makers are concerned.
Hmm.
So give me the mini underdog in Houston to to pull off the upset, or one of these other teams that is like we talked about in that illustrious Ken Palm 2030 group, like a Texas Tech, who
They're tough.
they got some certified dudes on that
Yeah.
roster. Their defense is scary. They're really long and they control the tempo really well. I could see a Texas Tech making a strong bid for a championship this year. They got a tough side of the bracket to work through to get there with potential meetings with both Auburn and Florida. But man, if any team on and potentially Michigan State if they're able to finish this comeback, so
Yeah.
it could be a tough road to the final. But a team like Texas Tech could do it.
We should probably wrap here in a second, but one team I want to give a quick shout out to and see if you watched any of them is Maryland. If you, I know we
Hmm.
just talked about them in respect to Colorado State, but they seem like a fun team too. They get up and down pretty well. This is Derek Queen. He's a
Oh,
dude.
Derek Queen's like he's a mini, slightly more athletic version of Joker. He does everything for them.
Mm.
He draws so much attention. He's really fun. And again, another team that makes it into that illustrious top 20, top 30 group. So
Do you know what else they have? An NBA player, because he's that.
he's that dude. He's
Yep.
that dude.
Cool.
Yeah, would love to see them continue making a little run. They got their got a heck of a scare today out of the Lobos. Or not
Rams,
the
Colorado
Lobos.
State.
Yeah, Lobos are giving Michigan State the scare right now.
Yes, they
But
are.
should be a fun back half of the tournament because we have so many of those perennial teams going to be squaring off with each other, and so many of the highest rated teams as far as Ken Palm is concerned still vying for the win. So should be exciting.
I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. And I think I'm there with you. I want to take the underdogs and bet against those three for the field because it's just
Nice.
more fun that way.
Oh
And
yeah.
I want to believe in something else.
Right
All right,
on.
Jordan, is this where we wrap it? Any final hot takes?
Shoot, you go Pepperdine Waves. They almost made the amazing run as the 11 seed in the WCC tournament. Made it all the way to the semifinals. Gotta love my Waves. Shout out to Kessler Edwards tearing it up on the Dallas Mavericks.
Love it.
That's all I got.
Love it. Well, Jordan, it's been a pleasure talking college hoops with you. We missed Josh and Haley tonight, but hopefully they'll be back with us next time. And, thanks everybody for tuning in. Keep your ankles wrapped it tight and your friend group even tighter.